If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what are some unexplained events or encounters involving glitches, entities, ghosts, paranormal woods, demons, mimics, etc.? This happened last night, and it's still freaking me out a little. I was going outside to scrape out the rice maker into my composter, and something or someone whistled at me. In a kind of yoo-hoo fashion, as if to get my attention. I ignored it the first time, but I heard it again and nodded back into the house. The nearest neighbor is a mile away, and there's nothing but woods out here. What the heck could that have been? Whether you believe in the paranormal or not, I'm looking for advice, and I need help. It all started when my younger sister, Gabby, was between the ages of 2 and 3, she's now 6. At the time, our house had one kid's room upstairs and 2 downstairs. Gabby was in the one downstairs while me, 15F, and our other sister, 10, were, and still are, in the downstairs rooms. This is important. Gabby would say that something would come out of her closet at night and pinch her. She called it Moose, and if that's not scary enough yet, it gets worse. When I asked Gabby to describe Moose, she said he was tall, black, and wore a suit and top hat. One day, we were at our grandma's house in the country. There's a line of trees surrounding her house, and Gabby told me this. She said a man in white came down from the sky and gave her a doll, and the moose took this doll and is hiding in the woods with it and wants her to come get it back. Somehow I knew he was going to take her, and I was scared. After that day, Moose stopped bothering her, I think because he failed at his initial attempt to get her. Everyone else thought he was gone, but I knew he wasn't. My mom had twin boys, so we added another room to the basement, and the boys got the upstairs room. Right away, I was uncomfortable with this, but now my fears have been revealed. Moose is back, and he's trying to take my brothers. We found out he's a shapeshifter, and I've seen him when he crawled across our couch in the night while I was awake. I'm scared for my brothers, and we've asked our pastor to come bless our house, but he won't because we sage and call ourselves mediums because we are mediums. We've done holy water, but he won't go away. He's trying to take my brothers. If you know me, then you know that nothing matters more to me than my siblings. Moose hates me, and I can feel it. He doesn't want me getting in the way of him taking my brothers like I did when it came to my sister. I'm scared for my brothers. I need advice and help now. Growing up, maybe 8 to 10, me and my cousins and brother were playing to see who dug the deepest hole. It was around 5 p.m. I'm from Central America in the Caribbean, and it started to get dark around that time. I was digging, and I could almost fit my little arm almost to the elbow by then. I was a bit far from my cousins to their left. When I was elbow deep and was pulling dirt out, I was suddenly in shock because I could see a smoky white hand following me as I was pulling my arm out of the hole as if it were to grab me. It was something smoky, not with texture or a full form. But, at the same time, I was surprised and turned to call my cousins and brothers. It disappeared. Until this day, 42, I cannot explain and relive it like it was yesterday. Daring Woods, Screaming Woods, is said to be the most haunted forest in the UK. In 1948, 20 bodies were found in the woods, all piled together. The dead were from 5 different families, and 11 of them were children. The previous night, the locals of the village had reported seeing strange lights coming from the woodland. When the bodies were discovered, they had no signs of injury or explanation for their deaths. The autopsy reports also could not explain what had happened to them. Exactly 50 years later, 4 students went missing in the woods and were never seen again. No bodies were ever found either. More reports, however, of strange lights in the woods have been made. To this day, there are a lot of reports of paranormal activity around here, a few of which are documented in the above story. We live on a remote farm in the Peak District of Derbyshire, England. My bedroom faces onto the yard at the back, and opposite is a building for the animals, and to the right of it is a huge field where they can go during the day. Surrounding us at the back is a wood. We get hikers there sometimes, usually in the summer, but, like I said, we are remote, and the nearest neighbor is about 2 miles away, so there's no reason for anybody to be around at night. One evening, a few years ago, it was dusk, and while not completely dark, it was black on the field where the woods are. I was closing my curtains in my bedroom when I saw a white figure with a faint glow just standing near the edge of the field, looking away towards the other end of the field. It then started to walk towards the wood, but there is a fence there that they would have to climb over to get into the woods. I think this figure just walked and faded. I never saw it again, but now I basically keep my curtains closed all the time before it even starts to get dark. This one happened when I was around 7, and it's the reaction of the adults around me that made me remember this into adulthood. I'll tell you what I remember and then what my parents told me about this event. I remember the walk across fields in the daytime. It was summer and sunny, and we kids enjoyed running slightly ahead of the adults. I remember the gate, which was made of thick wood and looked quite new. My uncle lifted us kids over it. I remember the path being more dirty, like on the other side, and there were trees on either side of it. I remember the weather changing, it got gloomier and looked like it might rain. I remember the feathers. The path at one point was covered in white feathers, and we all stopped. I remember the singing. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere, like a choir, I thought at the time, but it sounded scary to me. I remember my mom and my aunt saying they wanted to turn back. I remember the quicker pace and not being allowed to run ahead. My mom's hand gripped mine tight. I remember the oh my god when we got to a gate. This gate was old and broken, and we kids could almost step right over part of it. I remember the weather being sunny again and the fast pace back across the field. I asked my mom about this years later, and she was stunned that I'd remembered it. She said it frightened her and my aunt and that it had even unnerved my dad. Her account was that we walked across a field in a hilly area and, at one point, had to climb over a new gate. She said that part way down the dirt path on the other side, there were white feathers everywhere, and all of a sudden, chanting or singing echoed through the trees. She said it sounded like monks, but it was unpleasant and really frightened her. It was darker and not as sunny as it had been before. We turned back down the same straight path, but the gate had changed. She said they couldn't understand how they'd traveled a straight path only a short distance and not gotten back to a new gate. My dad confirmed this and said they'd not turned or veered off course because there was only one path to follow. He said he couldn't understand where the new gate had gone. Did we stumble into something paranormal? There's a little inn just off the river in Townsend, just before you get to the entrance of Smoky Mountains National Park. It sits a few hundred yards off the river, just off the main road. Very late, around 1 or so, sitting outside on a balcony by myself, I noticed the frogs and bugs who had been a constant drone all night had stopped suddenly. The frogs were breeding in the primarily empty pool, and the remaining mucky water was full of tadpoles and adults. Everything suddenly felt, I guess, heavy is the closest thing I can describe it as. I heard what sounded like something very large moving in the river. Now, I've been around wildlife all my life, as well as working at a zoo for a year or so. I know what fish flopping sounds like, and I've watched deer and other exotic animals play in water. This sounded almost like a fly fisherman about waist deep moving around, only much, much louder, bigger. I didn't get any visual confirmation on anything, as it's dark as hell there at night, but it lasted about 2 minutes. Loud sloshing like something was crossing or traveling down the river. This would have been weird enough, but all the crickets, frogs, and such just going dead silent during this was very unsettling. It all added up to this feeling of dread that I have a hard time putting into words. After a couple of minutes, the sounds in the water stopped, and almost immediately, the regular sounds of the area started back up. We stayed in that same room for 3 more nights, and nothing happened again. The bugs and frogs were constant after dark. I have read a few things here and there about natives encountering elemental type creatures. Nature spirits in some cultures pop up, but I haven't seen any contemporary writings about anything like this. Has anyone had anything similar happen? I have experienced a few paranormal things in my short life. Some were creepy, but harmless. Others were terrifying. And one experience has haunted me since I was a child. It was the first time I saw something that I would describe as evil. And years later, I saw that evil being again. Well, a few weeks ago, my girlfriend and I visited my aunt and my grandma. We wanted to see if everything was alright, but because of the virus, times were difficult. My grandma and my aunt live in a beautiful old house near a little village. I spent a large part of my childhood there, and because of my family, I came into contact with occult things like magic, ghosts, and such. It runs in the family. It was sometimes a weird childhood, but all in all, it was very beautiful. At first, everything was normal during our visit. We talked about what was going on in our lives, and at one point I decided to go outside and catch some fresh air. The others stayed inside. Near the house, there is a forest. You have a good look at it if you are in the backyard. I stared at the trees and noticed that something was moving between them. I couldn't see it very well in the beginning. But then it stepped out of the forest, and I noticed it was an old friend. The thing, and I really mean thing, looks like a tall man in a black coat. But I know that it isn't a human being. It was just standing there and looking at me. It didn't move. The first time I saw it was many years ago. At this time, I was just a child, and this thing scared me almost to death. I always ask myself, what would happen if I saw it again? Now I have the answer. My fear returned, I began to shake and felt like I was losing the ground under my feet. I felt sick, and in the end, I had to vomit. My girlfriend and my aunt joined me outside and asked me what was wrong. I couldn't answer in the beginning. It all felt just unreal. The man was gone. Later, I told them what happened. I saw the tall man from there again. Like me, they were scared. My aunt was there when I saw it for the first time. My grandma banished it from our house back then. My girlfriend knew the story, and she knows that I am like a magnet for paranormal things sometimes. She was often with me when something happened. But she never saw me that scared. My grandma said it would be best if we went immediately. The days after that, my condition was not the best. I couldn't sleep well. I had terrible nightmares. Sometimes it was so strong and horrible that my girlfriend tried to wake me up. When I woke up, it took a while until I understood that I wasn't in danger. I was at home in my bed. I was paranoid and couldn't concentrate very well. This went on for days. Even now, it is difficult for me to write this down. I stayed in contact with my aunt after that, but she said this thing didn't return. My dad and I were driving through Oregon in the middle of the night during a storm. We had taken the wrong road and were driving on a one-lane road through the mountains. No houses, no cars, not even cell phone service, nothing but trees around. There was the odd flash of lightning, but mostly just heavy rain. As we turn a bend over the ridge of a forested hill to our left, we see the sky strobing, like lighting, but in a continuous, perfect rhythm. I ask my dad what it is, but he shrugs and continues to concentrate on driving through the storm. We continue on past the hill, and it opens up onto a valley, where we finally see the source of the strobing light. Above the trees, maybe 50 feet up, was a large, 20 to 30 foot-ish, in diameter ball of blue light, difficult to tell the exact size as it was still a fair distance away, perfectly round, just hovering there. The strobing was coming from a single bolt of what I can only describe as lightning coming from the bottom of the ball and hitting the same tree over and over again and lighting up the sky. My dad and I watched it as we passed, and it continued on flashing until we rounded another bend and it was out of sight. To this day, I have no idea what it was that I saw. This happened last night. I am currently car camping. I woke up last night to go for a whiz, and while I was doing my thing, I could see a floating, irregularly shaped light off to my left, about 2 meters, 6 feet, away. I didn't feel scared, more of a, what is that kind of feeling? I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this. Appearance, kind of like a parallelogram, except the short edges were jagged and ripped into 2 long appendages. It was kind of a milky white, with no light emanating from it. Movement, it floated in a straight line and came to a tree, where it did 3 little hops and disappeared around the tree. Back to the encounter. I finished my business, but I didn't have my phone. I did have a flashlight, so thinking it was someone in the trees, I shone my beam through the trees, but nothing reflected back. I turn around to go back in the car, and the light thing is dancing around the back of my car. Right beside me. I was able to walk up to it and try to touch it. I say try because my hand just touched the car. But the weirder thing was that when I touched it, my hand created a shadow over top of it. It had no feeling at all, it was like touching the air. After it floated around the car, it disappeared around the side of the car, and I lost sight of it. I climbed back in the car and prepped my phone just in case that thing floated through the window. From the age of 8 to 19, I lived in a wooded area with a house on the end of a wooded gravel driveway. We didn't have street lights or neighbors nearby. There was a pond on the property, so you would hear frogs and insects in prime summer. Other than that, the nights were dark, our driveway was a wild trail through the woods, and our house was a small clearing. The experience occurred 3 times for me, all at night. My brother, dad, and a few friends all experienced this 1 to 3 times. All at night as well. We experienced a loud sonic boom crash into the woods at night. It would occur in a moment and always be just out of sight, but when it was so loud and close, it would stop you dead in your tracks. The noise left you with the feeling that it was a large branch being swung at a tree by something way stronger than a human. Many explanations have been thought up. The most common is a fallen tree. However, we didn't ever find downed trees afterwards. The noise was always similar to a gun going off or a bull whip being snapped. The energy released into the boom was enough to make anyone who'd heard it want to get away from the source instantly. We had other unexplainable occurrences on this property. However, most were experienced when we were young and when we played as kids. I had a strange event happen to me and a good friend when we were teenagers. We were walking a neighbor's property that had some short trails on it that all wound up at the mouth of the trail. No matter what one you took, you'd eventually end up at the mouth. We walked it quite a bit and knew the trails well enough. One morning we took off and walked them, and on our way out, we kept ending up in the same spot. That wasn't the mouth of the trailhead. It was like we were stuck in a loop. No matter what trail we took, we ended up in the middle of this one trail. After about 3 times, we got kind of worried. Convinced we weren't lost, it's damn near impossible to get lost on these as long as you stay on one of them. I made some markers out of spent shotgun shells. We found that the neighbors probably shot the deer season before that summer, put them on sticks, and jammed them into the ground. Kept ending up in the same spot every time. Still. We started walking around 10 a.m., if I remember correctly. By the time we finally got out, it was nighttime. Every time I checked my phone on the trails, only a few minutes had passed, like we had only been out there maybe an hour max looking at the time. We never lost daylight, either, until we finally made it out. I had a signal the whole time but never got a call or text. We broke through the mouth of the trail, and it was dark. My friend and I kind of looked at each other confused, and when I checked the time, it was almost 7. We somehow managed to lose time, as far as we can tell. My parents had been looking for us, and my mom was on the phone with the cops when we got home. Having now found a way to logically explain to them what happened to us, I just said my phone died and we were playing in the woods. We didn't talk about it for years, and the last time we did, my friend said the exact same thing I just did. We somehow lost time. It felt like we were in a glitch where no matter where we went, we ended up in the same spot. Those woods always kind of had an eerie feeling to them. Always super quiet, no birds or small animals making noise, no wind either. I have only been back a few times since then and have never had the same experience. This experience happened when my wife and I stayed in Banff National Park for the week back in September. We've always paid a visit to this beautiful landscape whenever we visit my folks in Calgary, Alberta. Although we didn't think we would have a paranormal experience this time around. We try to do excursions that we haven't done yet every time we make a visit, a mix of touristy things and non-touristy stuff. Near the end of our trip, we were scheduled to visit the cave and basin, which was a 7-minute bus ride from Banff town. We decided to go upon opening so that we could avoid the crowds and have lots of time to do other things on our list that day. A bit of info for those who haven't been to the cave and basin, or Banff, for that matter, is that from what we read, it is a kind of museum where they show how Banff was rediscovered by Canadian railway workers back in 1883. It was rediscovered because this national park was, and still is, a sacred land for Indigenous people. It had been like this for centuries before it was rediscovered. We came into the entrance of the tunnel to the cave, where these railway workers were said to have dug through and discovered a large sulfur well. This sacred cave was used by Indigenous people as a place for healing. Going through the tunnel is dark, and its only light source is above the well itself, where the sunlight peeks through. It was quiet and eerie walking through the dark tunnel. I can hear whispers even if we were the only ones going in. Then something told my wife not to look into the water in the well. She said after that she may not have liked it if she looked down there. We didn't stay too long in the cave, as it started feeling claustrophobic and the smell of sulfur was unbearable. My wife told me what she felt when we came out of it. I told her that I did not see anything, and I looked into the well myself. Little did I know at the time that this creepy experience wouldn't end here. Next, we continued the tour and made our way to the top of the building, where a bridge connects the museum to the forest of Sulphur Mountain. As we crossed over, we saw a small cabin that served as lodging for the railway workers back then. We were right above the cave that we were just in about half an hour ago. The cabin was surrounded by a large forest, ascending up the mountain. And right when my wife was reading information about this cabin, I felt a dreadful feeling. A feeling I'm familiar with when there's a spirit or entity in the midst. It also felt like there were a number of people watching over us, even if it was just the two of us up here. As I looked from left to right, my eyes were drawn to the tall trees at the far back. And there I saw a dark entity so massive and tall that it stood as tall as the tree beside it. Though I cannot see its face, I knew it was staring at us, as if guarding the area. It did not feel like a ghost, but like a spirit or entity that felt so old, maybe as old as the forest itself. I felt that we weren't welcome here anymore. I then motioned to my wife that we cut our time here, and we left with haste. It was only after we left the grounds that I told my wife what I saw. Seeing an entity like that was understandable, knowing how sacred that place is for Indigenous people. So whenever you get the chance to visit Banff or these national parks, learn the history and respect the land, its people, and the unseen guards. Do you also have similar experiences at Banff or other national parks? My friends have been sleeping with this guy, whose previous girlfriend committed suicide. Real sad. Anyway, they've been together for about a year now and are quite serious. The only thing is that she has been feeling this presence around her for some time. Fast forward to a couple of weeks ago. She goes and sees some energy healer type lady. The lady seems a little more intuitive than your typical psychic, i.e., not safe guesses. She pretty much tells my friend that she has a young woman following her around who died recently. So my friend goes home that night and falls asleep. At some point, about 2 in the morning, she is suddenly awoken by this cold hand touching her feet. My friend lives alone. She bolts out of bed and is obviously freaked out. She looks around her small apartment. She is alone. Now hysterical beyond belief, she blurts out, "Leave me alone." Right then, at that exact moment, the light bulb explodes, and she's in the dark. Completely freaked out, she calls her parents and stays on the phone for the next 3 hours until sunrise. The electrician comes the next day. Has to replace the entire circuitry of her apartment. He has never seen anything like it. This happened to me in May of 2019. I'm in my 30s, I have an open mind for the paranormal, but I don't really believe in it, and I would definitely describe myself as someone rooted in a more scientific belief system. I'm definitely not religious in any way. I live near Atlanta, Georgia, in a small town. I was getting ready to drive to work. My husband and I live in a ranch-style house with an attached garage. I went into the garage through the door that connects it to our living room and opened the garage door. I then opened the passenger side door of my car and put all my stuff on the passenger seat, lunch bag, water, jacket, etc. So I was leaning into the car. I suddenly caught a movement out of the corner of my eye through the back window of my car, and as I looked over, I caught a shadow figure walking past our garage and crossing our driveway. There was no color to it, just a black shadow, but it definitely looked like a man. Not a woman, not a child. My first thought was that my husband snuck out the front door to scare me. Thinking that I might get a chance to scare him, I sneak out of the garage and around the corner into our yard, but nobody's there. I even walk around the house, and nobody's there. I was absolutely confused at that point and kept trying to explain this rationally, as in, maybe a bird flew past and my brain made it into a shadowy human figure? I told my husband about it later that day, and he confirmed he was definitely not out there. My husband, however, is someone who does believe in the paranormal and has had plenty of experiences. He has seen a shadowy figure in our yard, and not just once. Our house is not old, and all the previous owners are still alive and well. It was built in 1988. The land it was built on was definitely an area very much involved in the Civil War. There was an important battle a little down the road, and Native Americans were very active in our area as well. There are numerous grave sites nearby, but not on our property. I've never seen anything like this again since 2019, but I still think about this incident quite frequently. This has been bothering me for a long time. When I was in the 4th or 5th grade, I went to a sleepover. We were in the basement, and the parents were asleep on the 2nd floor. We were also supposed to be asleep, so we took turns being stationed at the top of the basement stairs in the kitchen, listening in case we woke her parents up. On my turn, I heard a noise. I crept down the hallway towards the back staircase to listen. There was a bathroom door there, a half bath just off the kitchen, the door was cracked, and the light was on. When I looked through the crack, I saw a woman. She was young, in her 20s or younger. I was young at the time, so I may have misjudged. Normal clothes, no weird visual effects, it didn't seem like a ghost but a real person. Very curly blonde hair, like wet-looking 80s ringlets. She was looking down at something but looked up at me through the door and looked concerned and scared. I immediately felt like I had caught her, like I wasn't supposed to see her there. Since I thought she was a real person, I ran back down the basement steps and told the other girls to hide. We did for a few minutes, but after nothing happened, they started to question me. I had sort of assumed that someone else was in the house. Maybe my friend had an older sister I had caught sneaking back in. There wasn't anyone but us and the parents, and after a little while, they assumed I had made the whole thing up as a prank. I've never had an explanation for it. I don't think she was a ghost. The house wasn't that old. If I was hallucinating or sleepwalking, then in 30 years it's never happened again. Last summer, I went on a short road trip to Mostar, Bosnia and Herzegovina, with my boyfriend. One night we had a dinner in a traditional Bosnian restaurant, and we got a photograph of the staff posing and dressed up in traditional Bosnian clothes as a gift. I guess other guests got this gift too. I took the photo with me and brought it home because I wanted to keep it as a memory of our trip. When I got home, I put the photo in a drawer on my bedroom's desk, and that's it. Fast forward 3 to 4 months. I was getting ready for something when I walked into my room and saw this restaurant picture sitting on my desk vertically. It wasn't just sitting there randomly, it was leaning against some object that I had on my desk, so it was full on display, literally like I wanted it to be seen and displayed there for everyone else to see. I hope I explained myself well here. Of course I was confused, but I thought that maybe my mom was looking for something in my drawer and put the photo up there. I asked her, and she was like, WTF no, and said that she saw the picture and wanted to ask me why I displayed a random restaurant photo on my desk for no reason. We both thought it was weird but dismissed it because we thought that one of us must have done it unknowingly, and just the two of us were living in the house. Nobody else had access to my room at that moment. I put the photo back in a drawer and continued living. That happened a few weeks ago. But now I am absolutely creeped out. Literally an hour ago, I was just sitting in my room, chilling, and watching a movie. I hear something foul on the floor near the desk. I went to see what it was, and there was this damn restaurant photo just lying there. It was in the drawer, and somehow it fell from who knows where and landed on my floor. Where did it come from? I wasn't even near my desk, I was across the room on my bed. What the hell is happening? Is that damn picture haunted, or am I in the Matrix? Starting in March, we often hear very strange sounds in the woods. It first happened when my roommate told me to come outside and stargaze with them. We were out there for about 10 minutes and started hearing a man in the woods singing. We are deep in the forest, and it was like 2 a.m., so it didn't make any sense that someone would be out that late singing loudly. It was also pitch black, and we didn't see any flashlights or headlamps, and there were no leaves on the trees yet, so we could see pretty far into the woods, and if someone had a light and was that close to us, we definitely would have been able to see it. Needless to say, we all immediately went inside. The best way I can explain how it sounds is if you've ever watched Over the Garden Wall. It literally sounded like the beast who sings in the woods. The next time we heard him was a few weeks later, while we were having a fire. He didn't sing for very long, just a few seconds, and since we'd already heard him the first time and nothing bad happened, we stayed out to finish our fire and then went inside. After that, we didn't hear him again for a while. It wasn't until June that one of us heard him again, and it happened to be after a dream that I had. In my dream, there was a little guy in a yellow raincoat running around near the pond in our woods, and I was trying to focus my eyes on him, but he was so fast that I couldn't get a good look at him. For some reason, I felt that he was getting a kick out of that I couldn't perceive him fully, and I was getting frustrated about it. The next day, before I even told anyone about that, my partner heard the singing man again, this time in broad daylight. He wanted to get to the bottom of it and assumed a distant neighbor was messing with us, so he followed the voice into the woods. He was trying to be quiet and sneak up on the person, but every time he got close enough to almost see the person, the voice changed locations immediately. At one point, he said that he heard the singing so loudly that it had to be right around the corner of the trail he was on, so he jumped around the corner fast, and immediately the voice stopped. A few seconds later, it started up again all the way across the street in a whole different part of the woods that would take about 10 minutes to walk to by trail. For whatever reason compelled him, he decided to run over there as fast as he could, only for the singing voice to once again be even further away when he got there. At that point, he was very confused and returned home sweating and out of breath. He told me that he felt like the singing voice was enjoying messing with him and that the reason he kept trying to get to it was because he was getting frustrated. It is now August 12th, and we heard him again tonight, once again, but only for a few seconds. It kind of felt like, as soon as we recognized it, it stopped purposefully. There are some other weird noises I've heard around the property as well. A few days ago, I was sitting at the picnic table on my phone and heard a distant neighbor yelling for their dog. Then, on the other side of the woods, I heard someone mocking him in a higher pitched voice. There was also one night when we were bringing our chickens in because they decided to fall asleep on the porch. Every time we picked them up, they made surprised chicken noises. After we got them all in, we heard what sounded like a chicken choking in the woods. I've always been skeptical about stuff like this, and I still am, but I am open to the idea of things existing that we don't understand. These are all the examples I can think of regarding the weird things we've experienced since moving here. I'm sure we will hear more soon, and I'm honestly not too bothered by it at this point because nothing bad has happened. It just feels like we're being messed with. I think that we just have to ignore it, and hopefully it'll just get bored and eventually stop. I grew up in Central Texas on a bit of property where we found some arrowheads and stuff periodically. Native Americans used to live out there. Anyway, in high school, my best friend and I decided to take a Ouija board out to the woods. Stupid, in my opinion, now. I don't remember all the details, but we talked to a Native American who loved a white girl who died or something way back when. I honestly don't believe much in the Ouija board, but I enjoyed messing with it. We closed the session and went back to the house. Later that evening, we were upstairs in my room and decided to head downstairs to get a snack. It was pretty late in the evening. As we got to the top of the stairs, my cat dashed up the stairs, hair on end. We go down the steps and see the reflection of what looks to be a Native American man in the back door window. We both saw it. It couldn't be us, as the stairs are off to the side of the door. There was also no one downstairs. The next time we looked, the man was gone. I believe it to have been a trick of the lights and a bit of an overreactive imagination. However, one really creepy thing did happen that night. My room had 2 twin beds. My friend was in the one farthest from the door. I was at that point, right before falling asleep, when she shouted out my name to turn the lights on. I asked why, but she refused to explain until the lights were on. As soon as the lights were on, she hopped out of bed and looked underneath it. She swore something had grabbed her foot, and as the lights turned on, she slithered away. I thought it could have been the cat, but he was not in the room. I like to think the ghost of the Native American was telling us to leave him be. We had a few other encounters throughout the rest of high school, but they were completely unrelated to that day. Everyone in Asia will be familiar with the term pakong, or what many of us refer to as gula gula. What if I told you it does not look like what we expect it to be? We usually associate pakong with a ghost wrapped in white cloth and jumping from one place to another, but that's wrong. It's usually covered in filthy cloth with no hint of whiteness, and it's floating instead of jumping. Back in 2012, if I remember correctly, I had 2 separate incidents of encountering this pakong. The first incident took place during my friend's gathering. There were around 5 of us, and we were chilling in this hut, gossiping and laughing, the typical teenager stuff. It was getting late, and there weren't as many people, but we stayed until the late hours. Nothing supernatural happened until we took a selfie. The first picture we took looks normal, but in the second picture, the pakong was in the frame. At first glance, you might not suspect it as a pakong as it just looks like a brown spot, but upon closer inspection, we realized there are slight facial features. The scariest part was that the pakong was about 8 to 10 meters behind us, flapping beside a street lamp. None of us said anything because we didn't want to alert the pakong. I mean, most of our parents usually remind us not to acknowledge its presence because it is similar to inviting it over. But one of my dumbass friends said, "Hey, look, I got something, see ya, look like pakong, ha." When he said that, there was a quick gush of wind and a foul smell. A better way to describe the smell is rotten eggs. Already uneasy, all of us stood up and made our way to the nearby HDB blocks to park there instead. Nobody opened up about that experience, and we deleted all our pictures, even the ones without the pakong. Luckily, none of us had any disturbances that night. The second incident took place a few months later. I could still remember the pakong incident vividly, but I still made the decision to go for a night run. I was actually going through a tough time and really needed some fresh air. I had no intentions to run in Clementi Woods Park at all, but somehow I ran and appeared there. There were a few other joggers, so I wasn't that scared, but there are times when I appear to be alone. Everything was fine until I ran past this playground in the park. The pakong was playing peekaboo with me. As I ran past, the same looking pakong peeked out from the back of a pole at the playground area. I sped up and felt like my stamina was back at full tank. As I was making my way out, the pakong appeared 2 more times, once behind a tree and 1 more time behind some bushes. I knew my eyes weren't playing tricks on me, but luckily, I managed to reach home safe. Again, there was no disturbance at home, but I really couldn't sleep that night, and this is the first time I'm sharing this story. Thankfully, the pakong doesn't follow people home, and I wonder if there are other people who have similar stories regarding this pakong. Now, I still live in the West, but I made it a point to never visit that place again. Sometimes, when I really have to drive past that area, I still have the chills, and I always feel like someone is peeking at me. When I was 15, I decided to go hiking in the woods on a bright summer day. It was hot, but being in the woods, I found plenty of shade. But I got lost in my own angsty teen thoughts. I don't remember what I was thinking of, but it must have been about how city kids have fun. I snapped out of it and realized I was in the grass. I brushed over my head and couldn't tell where I was. I had never been in that part of the forest before, and as I looked around for anything to tell me where I was, for example, the stone wall that was on the eastern side of the woods, the creek that lay in a ravine to the north, or the cornfield to the west, all I saw were trees and thick brush. When you trample through a brush, you normally can see the path you took in, but weirdly, there was no path. So I calmed myself and thought of what to do. I decided to head east because the stone wall lined most of the eastern side. If I could find it, then I would be able to follow it down to a lower field and find my way. Instead, I ended up finding a ravine that led down to the creek, but the stage, an old wooden structure that looked like a stage, and the field it was in were nowhere in sight. I thought a bit that if I followed the ravine west, I would find it. That lasted 10 feet when I found a really large wall of thorn bushes. South were many trees, and north was the ravine with the creek, blocked by thorn bushes. I turned around. Obviously, you have noticed, but I am not sure which is south at this point or north. I am telling it from the way I was facing when I heard it. It was faint at first, but it was clear what it was. The sound of drums. I was beating steadily, as though there were a drum circle behind me in the woods. I figured it was someone in the woods who would either 1. Kill me, 2. Molest me, 3. Give me weed, or 4. Help me out of the woods. So it beat being lost, so I headed towards the sound. As I walked, the sound didn't get louder or fainter, it was steady. I just kept walking. As I walked, the beat became more distinct. A definitive hand and not a drumstick. Not a big drum, but more like bongos. I followed the sound until I heard it fade, and then I heard dogs barking. It was then that I realized where I was, a place I was familiar with. I heard the drums a couple of more times when I was in the woods, but I didn't know where they came from. One point while walking with my cousin, we both heard it, and we swore it came from deeper in the woods. But we weren't sure who it was or why it just happened. The milk incident. Went grocery shopping one day, bought 2 gallons of whole milk, and put groceries away. Next morning, go into the refrigerator, and there's only 1 gallon of milk. WTF? At that time, one child was a newborn, and the other was 3. Aside from them, it was my husband and I living in the house. I just knew my husband had taken the gallon of milk that was for the kids, and I was livid. I searched his shop fridge, where he would keep drinks, etc., but there was no milk. I searched the trash bins to see if he used it all up on cereal and hid it due to my rage over an entire gallon of milk disappearing overnight. I look everywhere and then some. About 2 full weeks go by, and on a Saturday, my husband and I are unloading the dishwasher. I open the coffee cup cabinet. I'm a drink coffee 24/7 kind of lady, so I'm in that cabinet daily, to put away my coffee cups, and guess what's in the cabinet? A full, unopened gallon of whole milk is just sitting there. My husband and children had been out of my sight all day. I'd already been in that cabinet earlier that morning for my coffee. The milk was cool to touch but not cold, and it was sealed and not spoiled. Where the hell did it go for 2 weeks? We still talk about the milk incident, which happened 7 to 8 years ago. In late September or early October 2000, my parents had just put in a separate building behind our house for my recording studio purposes, and just to get away from everyone should I need it. We had bought a Radio Shack intercom system if either of us needed to reach each other when I was out in the studio. One night, I was working on music and had headphones on, so I didn't hear my mom calling me on the intercom. I needed a restroom break and to grab a drink from the fridge, so I walked into the house. As soon as I hit the door, my mom came into the living room, angry as hell, and proceeded to inform me that if I ever did that again, she'd whip me from then to 2008 and back again. I honestly didn't know what she was talking about, but she didn't believe me. Finally, when I myself got angry and said some choice words or phrases of my own, she realized I had no clue what she was talking about. It turns out that while I was out working in the studio, she heard me screaming for help over and over outside her bedroom windows, where she was located at the time. By the time she checked out her windows and the doors and couldn't see me, she tried to reach me via intercom, which I didn't hear. She was getting herself ready to go look outside and come knock on the studio door as I walked through the door. She insisted it was my voice, no mistake about it, screaming and pleading for help outside the house. It wasn't the first time one or more of the family had witnessed strange activity, at that house or the previous house I grew up in from birth until I was around 11 to 12 years old. But we were both so freaked out by what happened. She watched me from the back door to quickly go out to the studio and make sure all of my equipment was turned off and the studio door was locked, and I ran back as quickly as I could back into the house so we could be together just in case that, or something worse, happened again. I still get chills every time I think about it. I have been dating my boyfriend for about 3 years now. We live with his grandparents. Now, his grandma is really into paranormal/supernatural stuff, and I remember that she told me when my boyfriend and I first started dating that she saw her dead aunt in the bathroom. When she told me this, I wasn't too sure if I believed her because I can be skeptical about paranormal things at times. So fast forward, my boyfriend and I stay in her finished basement. One night I was up pretty late playing around and doing my makeup in the bathroom while my boyfriend was asleep. I saw something that looked like smoke filling the air, and I had this extremely uneasy feeling come over me. I felt the need to get out of that bathroom immediately, so I did. I ran out of the bathroom and flung myself onto the bed next to my slumped boyfriend. Right when I laid down, I felt little pieces of my hair start to move. Note, We sleep with a fan on high speed, and I like to sleep with my blanket over my head, so I naturally thought it was the fan blowing my hair around, so I tucked it back under the blanket. This happened seconds later, and it weirded me out. I eventually began to fall asleep when I woke up. This was around 4 a.m. I felt pressure against my legs as if someone were sitting down on the bed next to me, and I could feel the blanket moving the back of my legs. I obviously freaked out and sat up. I saw absolutely nothing. I ended up getting myself to fall asleep again. But when my boyfriend got up for work at about 6 a.m., the basement door that leads to the woods in his backyard was wide open. This is the weirdest house I have ever lived in, and that was my first experience here. And trust me, there is a lot more where that came from. This past Saturday, my wife and I decided to get away and go camping with our dogs. We live in Washington State and love spending our free time outdoors hiking and camping. When we camp, we avoid campgrounds and people, and we always seek out remote places where we can be alone deep in the wilderness. This weekend, we found a spot about 10 miles down an old Forest Service road on National Forest land. On the way to our camping spot, we passed some other dispersed campers along the road, but eventually found a nice spot to ourselves without cell phone reception or connection to the civilized world. We went to bed that night around 10 p.m. and tried to stay warm as the temperature dropped from the 70s into the 40s. I am naturally a light sleeper and continuously wake up throughout the night on a regular basis, and this night was no different. Every little leaf rustle and twig snap was waking me up. It also didn't help that my dogs were constantly wedging themselves between my wife and me, pushing me to the edge of the tent. Eventually morning came, and I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the birds chirp as the sun began to brighten the sky. It was about 5 a.m. as I lay there listening to the morning chill when I suddenly heard something that made my heart leap out of my chest. I heard a woman's voice, which seemed to be maybe 50 feet away from the tent, call out, "Is Amanda here?" I could barely breathe, and my face began to burn with fear. I lay there for what seemed like 10 minutes, waiting to hear the voice again or hear someone walking through the forest, but all I heard was the chirps of the early morning birds. I eventually got up, opened the tent, and looked around. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, and I definitely didn't see a woman. I began to relax and figured I must have been still going in and out of sleep as I lay in the tent and just dreamt that a woman was calling out to my wife, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about it and how vivid and real it was. My wife woke up not long after, and I told her about it, and she also said that I must have been dreaming. We ended up packing out early that morning so that we could get home and get some weekend chores completed before starting the work week. It's been 3 days, and I can't seem to come up with any other explanation other than what I was dreaming. I've tried searching around the internet to see if anyone else has experienced something similar or if there are any old legends or lore of voices calling out your name in the forest, but I haven't really found anything. I was camping on my friend's property. They were building a cabin but hadn't finished it, so we were staying in a camper. We were drinking beers and had a fire going. The property was basically just a clearing surrounded by woods. We were sitting there talking and joking around when, all of a sudden, the woods erupted all around us, all at once. It was like the monkey exhibits at the zoo. If you've ever heard when all the monkeys are screaming in unison, it's loud as shit, and there are multiple sources. The problem is that this was rural Virginia, and there aren't any howler monkeys in the woods that I'm aware of. We were instantly terrified and booked it into the camper. We were so overwhelmed with terror that we literally fell on top of each other trying to get into the camper. My friend who owned the property had bigger balls than we did, and he charged into the woods towards the howling with a flashlight. As soon as he hit the tree line, the noise stopped instantly. He didn't see anything. No animals. No people. Nothing. And it wasn't like whatever it was trying to leave the area, and he could hear them escaping. It was instant loud noise followed by instant silence with no identifiable source. I can't explain what it was. People suggested it was foxes, but to explain the sheer quantity and loudness of it would mean that a pack of 20+ foxes had to sneak up and surround us and erupt in unison. It could have been birds, maybe because it seemed to come from high up in the trees. But literal howling and screeching? I have never heard of a thing like this since. Now what's interesting is that the property my friends and family bought had quite a history. First off, it was used as an illegal moonshine still for decades. They found all the big casks tucked in the woods, and there was an old, rusted pickup used to haul the hooch still up there. Also, there was an old abandoned house on the property that they had demolished not long after buying it. When they first looked in the house, it was clear someone had been squatting there for a while. There are old mattresses on the floor and lots of discarded bottles and whatnot. The worst thing they found? The person had nailed the little girl's pants to the wall. Definitely not good people had been there at some point. One of my thoughts was that it was that person or people trying to duck with us. Basically saying, yeah, you guys are up here, but this is our property, type thing. I still don't have an answer, all these years later. I was living in the mountains of Pennsylvania. I was playing with my cousin in a game. He made me very angry, so I went for a walk at 2 a.m. which I would soon regret. I was used to going out at night, and I grew up in this neighborhood. So not much could really scare me. I start walking down the darkened road to look up and see a floating light. I was at the top of the road that would slowly sink into a pit of darkness. This light was appearing in the dark pit at the bottom. My first reaction was not fear but rather stupidity. For some reason, I was like, oh, that's someone's spotlight for their house. But it's literally in the middle of the road. So my stupid self would keep walking towards it. I'd say I was about 20 feet from it when it suddenly disappeared before my eyes. I'd run in fear till I jumped in the woods and went prone behind a tree. I would sit there without moving a bone for 20 minutes. I'd return home safe, but it left me wondering. Was it an insanely tall guy with a flashlight walking at 2 a.m. like me? But why was he standing still for so long? I always wondered, but who knows? To this day, I don't know why I thought it was a house spotlight. Maybe the anger from the game had my brain somewhere else. I just hope it wasn't a person. From their point of view, when they see a person without a light, walk slowly towards them. Maybe we scared each other. I will say that there were no footsteps chasing me. So it leaves me wondering about this day. Let me know what you guys think and if you shared any similar events. I've always been adventurous, especially in middle and high school. One day, when I was riding my bike home from middle school, I drove down a dead-end street that ended in some woods. I walked into the woods, following a deer path, which led me to a very large farm field. In the middle of the field, which was about 6 football fields large, there was an ancient tree next to an old silo that must have been built during the early 19th century or late 18th century. I walked to the tree and explored the patch of forage in the middle of the field. There was a rusty car from the 1930s, rusty old things, very old shoes, and the ancient silo, with only half of it remaining with some rubble nearby. After I discovered this place, I'd go here many times after school to get some peace and quiet away from civilization. On one of these days, something paranormal happened that I'll never forget. I was walking around the silo when, all of a sudden, I was surrounded by what sounded like a room full of people at a party. It was like being at a large party, surrounded by people talking all at once but not being able to distinguish any particular words. I snapped a few pictures with my 2003 Razr flip phone during this time. The voices slowly dissipated into silence. Later, when I got home and looked at the pictures, I showed them to my mom, and my mom's double amputee/legless husband put the pictures on his computer. There were many orbs of many different colors surrounding the silo. I snuck back to the silo many times after that, but nothing paranormal ever happened again. Years later, after my mom's divorce from my stepdad, we still can't find those pictures that were stored on his computer, and I must have thrown out my old flip phone, but I'll never forget hearing the waltz at that old silo. So the following happened to me one night a few years ago, and I still don't quite understand what I could have seen. I live on an acre in a neighborhood, and toward the back of my property, the front half is fenced, and the back half is my shed surrounded by trees. There's sparse wood that separates my property from my neighbors. One night, as I'm walking to the back to get something out of my shed, I carry my phone with a flashlight on so I can see. I open the back gate and take a few steps past when I suddenly see a strange white light blink into existence about 50 feet in front of me and to the left, just inside the tree line. The best way I can describe the light is that it looked like a round Christmas light, except it didn't radiate the light outward like a light bulb does. It lasts about 1 to 2 seconds, then just blinks out of existence. That is, until it blinked back on only a second later, but about 10 feet closer to me. It did this multiple times, always staying just inside the tree line, arching towards me, and staying at the same height from the ground each time, maybe 3 or 4 feet in the air. The last time it blinked on, it was only a few feet in front of me, just outside the tree line this time, and, in a panic, I raised my phone's flashlight and saw nothing there. No lighting bug, which I have never seen in the woods around my house, though they do live in my state, or any other insect flying. I quickly walked right back to my back porch, looked back where I was, and stayed there for several minutes, waiting to see it again, but it never appeared. A few years later, I have never encountered the light again and still have no logical way of explaining what I saw. If anyone else has seen or experienced something similar or could provide some insight, I would love to hear it. So for context, my partner and I live in a small home, also called a granny flat here, outside his parents' backyard. Our sitting room window allows us to see most of the back garden, including his parents' back door, depending on where you're sitting. A couple of nights ago, I was on the couch watching TV when I noticed a young man, mid-late 20s, seemingly walk from the back door of my partner's house onto the decking. I had assumed it was a friend of his brother or something of the sort, and he had just gone out to smoke. My partner's mother then came through the back door, was on her way towards us, and completely ignored the man outside, which I found strange. I had brought it up with my partner at this point, and he insisted that no one had been outside but his mother. Eventually, I lost sight of the man as he walked past my viewpoint. At this point, I was beginning to freak out a bit, as I had seen him clear as day, yet my partner and his mother hadn't. I had gone outside to check, but he was no longer there. Has anyone experienced anything similar? I've had my fair share of paranormal sightings, but nothing as clear as this during the day, and I could always tell if it was a spirit. We have our suspicions as to what it could have been, including some sort of time glitch by the past or future owner of the house. Any ideas are appreciated. I think I was in 7th grade at the time, and it was around 3:30 or 4 p.m. in the afternoon. I was watching the post-school cartoon lineup with Rescue Rangers, DuckTales, and all that stuff. My mom is nowhere to be seen because she just duck off to Where after my dad died and I was left to my own devices with dinner. Usually, I make microwave popcorn. That was what I got up to do this time. My room and the kitchen are both down at the end of a really long hallway that, at the middle point, connects to an alcove that has the front door. I'm crossing the hallway from my bedroom to the kitchen and realize there's a figure standing in the hallway exactly halfway down, as though it had just come in through the front door. I stop and look at it, and it's there looking at me. Now this thing didn't have any details to it the way that ghosts do in movies. It was a dark blue, opaque shape the size of a full-grown man. You could make out a head and limbs, but not hair, eyes, mouth, or anything like that. I wasn't scared of it in the slightest. I just stood there and stared at it for a prolonged time because it was the ducking middle of the afternoon and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Eventually, I start to think this is a bit weird. Why is this thing in my house, and why is it just staring at me? So in my head, I think the words "go away" mean it. I've never had a thought that felt like that one before. It was like I had said it out loud. It had weight behind it. The figure immediately turned and ran out of sight into the front door alcove. I ran down the hallway to the alcove too and found it empty. I spent several minutes standing there questioning my own senses and whether that had really happened. What was that thing, or was I going crazy? Then I went back down the hallway and made my popcorn. My brother would see angelic-like beings periodically. Our grandma used to tell him they were angels, but now that we're older, he isn't sure what they were. In one instance, he was lying in bed when these two beings came in carrying a box. He pretends to sleep as they walk it to his dresser and set it on top before leaving. He was always too scared to get up and look at the box, so he just continued laying there. Eventually, they would come back and retrieve the box. The incidents were all similar, with the object sometimes being a sword. Another time we were playing in the backyard when 6 lights appeared, spinning on the ground as if projected there. The only problem was that there was nothing in the sky or surrounding us that could have projected them there. We played in the lights and spoke of our amazement while trying to figure out where they were coming from. Then we went inside to get our parents. They didn't come out, but when we went back out, the lights were gone. It was super strange. We had no close neighbors, and the lights would need to be projected from directly above to see them the way they were. But there was nothing there. And for a bonus story, when I was very young, I was up late, unable to sleep, in anticipation of going hunting with a family member the next morning. I was on the couch watching TV when a rocking chair in the corner of the room began rocking itself at a strong pace. There was nothing to have caused it. There was no airflow, and the floors weren't uneven. They didn't ordinarily rock themselves. I was scared, but in my young mind, the logical thing to do was to pretend I wasn't scared and instead assert my dominance. So I sat in the rocking chair and rocked it myself. When I got up, it stopped rocking. I never saw it do that again. I'm sure the being, whatever it was confused. When I was about 11, I was watching a movie in the sitting room, and I fell asleep. When I woke up at around 8, I went downstairs and my family wasn't gone, and so was the car, so I just assumed that they had gone to dinner or something and they didn't want to wake me. This is what my parents did if me or one of my siblings fell asleep when we were going out to dinner, so I went back upstairs and started to fuss around on my laptop. I had one since I'd just started middle school, and next thing I knew, it was 12 a.m. and my family still wasn't home. So by this point, I'm starting to get worried and stuff, so I go and try to call, but I can't. But by now, I'm thinking that my brother's pranking me and turning the clock back and taking the house phone with him, something he would do even now. So I finally go up to bed at about 4 a.m. because I'm tired, and I knew they would be back by the morning, right? So I wake up the next morning at what my alarm clock says is 8. So I go downstairs and grab some cereal and go sit at the table, and about an hour later my family comes in, holding my youngest 2 sisters because they're sleeping, and I'm all like, "Where were you guys?" And they're like, "We went out to dinner and you were asleep. Sorry, we left you." And by this point, I realize that it's dark out and that the clock says 9 p.m., not 9 a.m. But it gets weirder. So I chalk this up to me dreaming the whole thing until they came home, and after I get ready for bed, I start to tell my mom, who is in her room, about the crazy dream I had while they were gone. And after I tell her the story, she just looks at me with this super concerned face and says, and I quote, "We had dinner together, honey." So as it turns out, I have about 8 hours of very vivid memory to account for that never even happened according to my parents, and they never went out, I never went to sleep, we all ate dinner together, and at this point, I remember that I only have one younger sister, not 2. I live in Southeast Asia, and this happened many years ago. I was about 9 when this happened. This was not my first experience with paranormal stuff, but it was the most unsettling. During my holidays, my parents sent me off to a short camp at an old school that has a dormitory built within its premises. We later found out that the dorm was built near an old cemetery. Everything seemed normal until the evening. I made friends with the other kids there, and unfortunately, one of the girls staying in my dorm room, 2 bunk beds, 4 kids, had to leave as her grandma was in the hospital. This left the top bunk of my bed empty. I found it hard to sleep, being anxious away from home, and was the last one awake in our room. It must have been around 2 a.m. when I started to feel really uneasy. It felt like safety got sucked out of the room. I was lying down and facing the wall, so I turned around to see if anyone had entered our room. Instead, I saw a pale face hanging down from the top bunk, staring at me. It's hard to remember all the details, but what stuck with me was its huge red mouth. It looked human except that it had an abnormally large blood-red mouth and was smiling. Its eyes were wide with what I perceived as glee. The entity did not come any closer to me, but it stayed hanging over the bunk with that sick smile and started swaying. This made me scared to move past it, as I sensed it did not have good intentions. I had my phone with me, so I called my parents to come fetch me, as I did not want to spend another day there. My phone's dial pad glitched a few times, but eventually I was able to contact them, and around 4 a.m., the camp leader moved me to another room. I had to stay the remaining 2 nights as it was apparently part of their policy, but the other 2 nights were peaceful. I spoke to the 2 people staying in my first room, and they said they slept fine. I tried to look up what the entity could be, but I did not really find a conclusive answer. Does anyone have any theories? My partner owns a cursed house. I say cursed because whatever haunts the land is malevolent, some kind of soul collector. The land the house sits on was the battlefield for no less than 4 Revolutionary and Civil War battles, the massacre of the native tribes, and overall just one in bloodshed at the maximum level. I noticed right away that something just wasn't right about the place. There were plenty of paranormal things, lights turning on and off, electric issues were ruled out, pantries and doors opening on their own, and strange sounds and smells. I saw the spirit of the neighbor guy wandering around after I took his favorite chair out of the widow's trash heap. He hung out until I gave up the chair. But there was a mood it projected. Anger. Rage. Violence. Contempt. It had come from nowhere for no reason. And it happened to everyone. Then I started having these ducked-up dreams. In every dream, I was approached by a being who told me that I belonged to it and that my life would be forfeit. This thing was a goddamn terror. I got extremely sick. Septic. Almost died. I lost my first child. Which this thing told me was entirely caused by it. I thought I was losing my mind. Then one afternoon, we had 2 friends over. I stayed in with one friend in separate rooms, playing MMOs on the computer. My door was closed. My partner and the other friend left, but I heard them come back and come down the hall to my room, but no one opened the door and came in, so I just waited. A few minutes later, my partner opens the door, all bewildered, asking me where I was, and I tell him I have been sitting there, waiting for him to come back. The friend that's with him turns ghost white, and he says, "Oh, no ducking way." My partner says to me, "We just came in here and you weren't in here," and I laughed at him and told him he was full of shit. The door to the room never opened. Somehow they entered this tiny 8 by 8 foot room, but I wasn't there. Yet I was in it, and the door never opened. Same for the other gamer. They went into the room, and he wasn't there. I dead-acidly looked at my partner and said, "I told you I wasn't ducking nuts, this house is ducked, and I'm moving out with or without you." And we did move. About 8 years later, we went back and had an infant child there with us. The dream started again for me, and I was just trying to cope. We put our son to bed one night and went down to the den to watch TV with his non-internet based audio-only baby monitor on. We were alone in the house with our son. Suddenly, I hear a voice over the baby monitor that turns my blood cold. It was the same voice from my dreams. He said something along the lines of, "What a gorgeous little one you are. I can't wait to take you." I don't know that I or my partner ever moved that fast in our lives, but there was no one in our son's room. We never heard voices over the monitor again. About 30 or so years ago, I and my boys, probably 4 and 14 at the time, were on our way to my parents' house one evening. We lived on the east side of Birmingham, Alabama, and our parents lived on the west side, a 30-45 minute drive, passing the airport about midway. It's normal, of course, to see planes coming toward you as they approach for landing, so I was accustomed to that and the timing of the approach. In other words, you sort of knew at what points the plane would be in relation to your location on the freeway as you drove toward them and about where you would pass them. We saw a plane headed our way and noticed that it seemed to not be moving toward us. The lights weren't exactly like an airplane. It continued to remain in the same place and was still there, just hovering over the freeway, just a few yards above, as we passed underneath. It was not a plane. It was shaped somewhat like a stealth fighter, but with odd lights on the outside edges and no sound. The thing that was the most strange was that no one else seemed to notice anything out of the ordinary. No one else was looking up, they were all just driving along like normal. I never heard anything about it anywhere. I'm an immigrant. I grew up in Ethiopia. We weren't very poor growing up, but we were also not rich or middle class by US standards. We lived in a house that had the main living quarters, which had our family room and living room, my parents' bedroom, and my sister's bedroom. And adjacent to it was a 3-bedroom service quarter that had a bedroom at the far end, a study in the middle, and another bedroom in the front. My 2 brothers and I slept in the front bedroom in this adjacent quarter. One night, I awakened to a noise I heard, a chair pulling, coming out of the middle of the study room. There is no door between the front bedroom and the study, but a wall between the far end bedroom and the study. I woke up and saw a lady with very long hair sitting on the chair that I believe I heard pulling. She was facing the opposite direction, so I couldn't make out her face. There was a light where she sat in the study room, but it didn't feel connected to the bulbs. About a minute in, she stood up and started walking towards my bed. My oldest brother slept next to me, and my second brother slept on a bed perpendicular to ours, so although I was scared, I felt at least they were there, but they were fast asleep. I closed my eyes and told myself I must be dreaming. I distinctly remember trying to actually dig my nails into my skin to wake up, but it just hurt badly. I kept my eyes closed, but I could feel her standing right next to our bed. There was a warmth to her presence, like a flashlight you shine close to your skin. She just stood there for what felt like an eternity. I did my best to pretend to be asleep. Then, right before my full panic set off and I started to scream, I felt her turning around and her warmth fading. It was then that I opened my eyes and saw she was more gliding than walking. And as she did, there was some sort of light aura that followed her. Our room turned pitch black again, and so did the study. The chair she pulled retracted back to its original position by itself. The main study door closed behind her by itself. And all went dark. I waited a few seconds and then started yelling on top of my lungs. My brothers woke up, and they could see I was visibly upset. I told them what I just saw. They turned on the lights and tried to calm me down, but I was in tears and shaking. They tried searching around the room and under the bed, in the closet, under the study table, and even the shelves in the room. But there was no trace. My second brother put his hand on my mouth and said, "Don't you wake up and tell this to our parents. They will think we smuggled a girl into our house, and our dad will have our asses." So I just kept quiet. I was 10 at the time, and I'm 38 now. I remember it as if it happened a few hours ago. I remember feeling scared, but I also remember feeling warm. I really regret not opening my eyes to see her face and find out what she is and wants from us. I think I would if I saw her again. Let me first start by saying that this is the single event that made me believe in anything supernatural or beyond the realm of what the average person considers to be real or possible. I work for a DPW on Cape Cod. This particular town on the Cape is filled with Native American legends and history. I work with natives from the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, and they are firm believers in spirits and other paranormal things. This happened almost 2 years ago, in mid-November of 2010. We were clearing an access way for the fire department off a road called Mashpee Neck Road. The A is actually exactly where the fire lane starts. It was to be a 15-foot wide path for the fire department to have access to in case of emergency to the river. We cut all the trees down and laid them on each side of the path to be chipped. At the end, we made a big circle, probably 100 feet wide, to allow any fire trucks to be able to turn around. I was with my foreman and 2 other laborers, one of whom was 100% Native American. Just as we started chipping, I turned to get a branch to throw into the chipper, and I saw, clear as day, what I would describe as a Native American woman and her child standing in full deer skin cloth, staring at me right in the eyes. They were within 100 feet of me, down a small hill. Just as I turned to tell my foreman to check out these people in the woods, they were gone. I didn't think anything of it. I thought I was just seeing things and told my foreman, never mind. As we continued, I felt this intense, heavy feeling of depression come over me. I wanted to cry, and thinking about it to this day makes me sad, and I tear up. We stopped for our 9:30 a.m. coffee break and shut everything down. This feeling is just growing and getting worse. I started to tell everyone what I saw. Just as I finished telling them about the woman and child, we all witnessed an intense ball of light coming from across the river, roughly 100 yards away. This light was huge. It was a bright white yellow in the middle with a blue ring on the outside. It was midway up the trees on the opposite side of the river, and it moved left to right up the river and disappeared into the woods. Just as soon as the light disappeared, we all heard drums beating in the same direction that the light was coming from. These drums were deep, and they went off in beats of 3 for 10 minutes or so. We all sat and listened, no one said a word. In this area of the woods, there are no houses at all. It's all conservation land and has been untouched for a long time. The Native American who was working with us told us it was tradition to bury people along the river. We continued chipping, and I still had this depressed feeling, but the further we got away from the river, it subsided. Just as we were out of sight of the river, this intense rush of heat came over my back. This was hot, like I was standing with my back to a fire. I could feel the heat through my jacket and sweatshirt, and it went away. I felt nothing after that. Clearly, something was not happy with us working near that river. I've been there a few times since, had some more things happen, done some research, and had tribe members tell me some strange stories as well. I didn't believe much in anything paranormal before this, but now I know beyond any doubt that there are some things that happen in those woods that I cannot explain. I've always believed in the paranormal and have experienced other things, but nothing quite to this extent. I grew up in Arkansas, and as a family in a smaller city, we spent a lot of time outdoors. Fishing, hunting, camping, etc. I was about 16 when my dad and I decided to go hunting on some land owned by a longtime family friend. I grew up hunting out there and was familiar with the majority of the property. My dad had been out prior and scoped out a few good spots to sit and wait. He took me to a dry creek that I wasn't entirely familiar with. It had a raised island in the middle of it. It was like 4 feet or so higher than the creek bed. There was a fallen tree on top of it, and he had me sit on the stump. He left me there and went to whatever location he had picked for himself. I waited there for a while, not really hearing or seeing anything. I eventually laid my gun down on the ground at my feet and stood up to stretch a little. I remember suddenly feeling a little odd, and while I was stretching, I started hearing thuds. It sounded like a horse running, or maybe a deer, but it sounded heavier. I could hear whatever it was but couldn't see anything. I was in the middle of the woods, and I heard no leaves being rustled around or anything. Only the thuds. Before I could react, I felt a hard shove on the center of my chest, and I fell backwards and off the little hill I was on. It pushed the breath out of me and scared me to death. After the hit, there was no more noise. Nothing is running away, just silence. The entire experience freaked me out, and of course, when I yelled and finally found my dad, he didn't believe me. Has anyone else experienced anything similar to this? I've seen and heard things before, but I've never been touched or hit. What could this be? So last weekend, me and my boyfriend decided we wanted to go out in the woods for the day. We decided to use a trail we had never used before because he thought he had seen it in a dream he had. Mind you, we've never been there before, and he was a very sheltered child and didn't go out much, further causing me to believe even more that he had never been. He ends up telling me about the dream he had years ago while leading me down a bunch of twists and turns. All while explaining to me that this is the way he went in his dream. And he starts to look more and more physically ill as we proceed. We end up in this big, pretty open area, and he pukes out of shock that his nightmare place is real. As a paranormal skeptic, I'm like, WTF? Can anyone explain what happened? My grandmother's house has always been haunted, if that is what this is. If you have any ideas on why this is happening as well as something I can do to make things better for her, please let me know. First, I'll give a little bit of history about my grandmother's house. It was built by my grandfather after my grandparents got married. The land was not plowed or cleared and was basically a forest before they built the house, and there is no record of anything ever being built there before their house. They bought the land from my grandfather's father, who bought it from his father. There has been one death inside the house, and it was after the experiences started happening. There have been a lot of very typical experiences in the houses. Multiple people have heard footsteps in the halls as well as doors opening and closing, things going missing and turning up in weird places, as well as weird knocks and bangs. A lot of these can be easily debunked, I understand that. There were a few weirder experiences, the weirdest being when my parents first started dating in high school. My father would come visit, and as soon as he would leave the house to go home, the whole house would begin to vibrate, enough to knock things off the shelves. My grandparents were always non-believers. My grandmother recently began to believe because the activity has picked up, but my grandfather passed when I was a small child. My grandfather got annoyed with the house vibrating when my father would leave, so before he left one day, he shut all the water and electricity off in the house, thinking it was something explainable, but the house still vibrated. Nothing outside did, only the house. There is also a bedroom at the end of the hallway where everyone refuses to sleep because you get really intense nightmares in there. We have a big, close family, and we do spend a lot of time at my grandmother's, so everyone that has stayed in that bedroom has experienced the nightmares. When my aunt and uncle had their first child, they stayed with my grandmother for a couple months, and my aunt moved out because she was home alone with her baby when she saw a man walk through the hallway, and she was so shaken up that she refused to stay in the house any longer, along with all her other experiences. On 2 occasions, items have come off the shelf, gone across the room over 10 feet, and landed in my lap, while people have witnessed it. We tried to find a way to recreate this and have never been able to. When my grandmother talks on the phone about our family, like a specific member of the family, while she is talking about them, a picture of them will fall off the wall or the frame will fall forward. My grandmother never believed in ghosts or anything paranormal until recently, the last month or so, when the activity picked up. She gets woken up in the night by a man shouting hello. My grandmother does foster care and has a baby in her care right now. She has had her since she was 3 months old. She is now 8 months old, and her toys have started to turn themselves on and play music when guests are over as well as at night. Not just playing music, the switch coming on and then a button being pressed. A few days ago, when I was visiting her, we were in the living room, and we heard a bedroom door open and close, and someone walk through the hallway. We both went looking to see who could be in the house, but there was no one there. My grandmother has been uncomfortable with these experiences, although no one has felt threatened or gotten hurt. I just want her to be comfortable in her own home. Do you know what this could be or why the activity has picked up? What about a way to calm things down for her? We live on a small island that is very rural, and I looked for people to come take a look at the house and give me advice on it, but I haven't been able to find anyone. Back in 2013, my husband and I moved from NYC to a rural part of Connecticut, where we had farms, cows, and wild forest animals. Being a city person my whole life, this came as a big culture shock to me. We had a little grassy field behind our 2-story country house, which never had any bad vibes about it. Our bedroom was on the 2nd floor, which had a bedroom window about 10 feet above the patio behind the house. One thing I never got used to was the sound of screaming coyotes at night. If we got home after dark, we would hurry to the front door of the house with groceries, trying to get into the house as fast as possible because of the coyotes, which were too close by for comfort. I was so naive that when I moved in, I wondered out loud, who would be having a kid's birthday party at night. One night, I woke up to a howling coyote right outside the house. My husband woke up. The bedroom window was right above our bed, and I sat up and naturally looked outside. I saw a grown coyote sitting on our patio, barking, howling up at my window, and staring straight into my eyes. It was the most unnatural thing. I couldn't believe how bold it was. It's not like we had barbecues, pets, garbage outside, or anything else that could attract a coyote. It was like it was trying to tell me something. It scared me, and it stayed for a while doing that, but in the morning it was gone. I didn't believe this was some kind of coincidence. I searched online for any coyote behavior stuff I could find, but all I could find was that it was a Native American spirit or symbol. I still didn't know what to make of it. Maybe it meant nothing at all and never happened again, but if anyone has any input, I'm curious. When I was younger, around 5 or so, I would see a little boy curled up in the middle of the carpet in my room, and I would often talk to it, according to my parents. I don't remember it much since I was so young. After 5 to 6, I stopped seeing him completely. Until one day, I was at my grandma's house. I was 9 to 10 at the time, walking into the spare room where I slept with my mini iPad. As I walked into the room, I looked up to get myself onto the bed without falling down and coing myself. When I looked up, lo and behold, the same little boy curled up at the front of the bed in the fetal position. Just as an add-on, my dad is a huge believer in the paranormal, and I told him everything about the little boy in my room, along with a physical description of him. So when I told my dad about the little boy in my grandma's room, along with a description of how he looked, my dad told me it was the exact same description as what I described the little boy to look like multiple years prior. My little self got scared, and I ran out of the room. I almost ate shit and fell face first on the floor, but I made it out of the room in one piece, minus the iPad because it fell out of my hands mid-run. My grandma was laying in her room doing her voice memos on WeChat, so she didn't see me run out in pure terror. I took a moment to collect myself and eventually slowly walked back into the room to look and see if he was still there, though I wouldn't have walked back into the room if it weren't for Markiplier playing on the iPad. God, I love that guy. Thankfully, the boy wasn't there anymore, and I went onto the bed still shaken up in an attempt to peacefully finish the FNAF gameplay going on. I went home the next day. After 2.5 years, I'm back at my grandma's house with 2 relatives that came from China and were staying in my grandma's spare room for a month with them. One of the people visiting was a girl about my age, 11 to 12, and her mom. I was staying over to have a sleepover with the daughter. We hung out all day, and as we were settling down in our beds ready to sleep, a toy car, the ones that toddlers go on, the ones with a mini soundboard that makes music and obnoxious little noises, started making music and stupid noises randomly. No one else was in the living area. Everyone was in bed. No one went out for a good 15 seconds, waiting for it to hopefully stop. News flash, it didn't. It kept going. Yip-dee-ducking-doo for me. Another thing to be scared about. My grandma, being the queen she is, walked out and took the batteries out of it. I'm not sure if it was some glitch or the same little boy wanting to play. Or maybe it was my grandpa who hit the bucket a while back. I still don't know to this day. It's been 4 years since that happened. I still dislike sleeping over at GM's place after both incidents happened. I'm the slightest bit traumatized. This story begins about 6 years ago, after the peak of paranormal activity started to die out. It started with random noises. They weren't really too out of the ordinary, so we ignored them, but they began getting more intense when we began hearing the front door closing and loud footsteps leading up and down the staircase. Technological glitches began happening, the TV randomly turning off or a light flickering. My new Xbox One experienced glitches after bringing it home for the first time, nothing too strange. But things began getting weirder. Me and my family had been on vacation, and when we got home, everything seemed normal, except one thing. There were handprints and tiny footprints littered across the TV screen, imprinted into a random, thick layer of dust. We had only been gone for about a week, but the dust across the TV and cabinet made it seem as if we had been gone for at least a month. There were 2 huge handprints, much larger than the average male's hands. My hand could easily fit in its palm alone, and the fingers appeared to be broken and going off in strange directions. The other prints were even more strange, 2 small footprints accompanied by just as small handprints. We all stood in the living room for a few minutes, staring at the prints and trying to make sense of them. But we couldn't. My mother eventually wiped the dust away, and the terrifying prints eventually slipped from our minds. This was the first encounter we had with Mac. And for a while, things seemed to be okay, but then I got home one day after school and got into the shower. When I was about to get out, I heard the front door open and close and loud work boots stomp up the steps and head into the kitchen. I assumed my father had gotten home and said hello as I walked to my room. After getting dressed, I walked about trying to find my father, but he was nowhere in sight, nowhere in the house, and when I went to check outside the front door, it was still locked from when I got home, and he was nowhere in sight. I gave up my search, assuming he just needed to grab something, but as soon as I began to relax, I heard his truck backing up the driveway. I walked outside and jokingly said, "Leave something at work." He just looked at me, confused, and asked what I was talking about. So I said, "You just came home a few minutes ago, I heard you walking up the stairs. And then you were just gone." He informed me that he had not been home since this morning. Thinking back to when I heard the door open, I hadn't heard his very loud truck pull up, and I didn't hear anyone leave. This happened a few more times, and there were a few times I got home or was relaxing only to find the front door wide open. This continued for weeks. And then, finally, I saw him. I was home alone one night sitting in the living room, first floor layout pictured below, watching my shows when the TV began acting out. I assumed the antennas were messed up, so when I went to adjust them, I saw him standing at the end of the hallway out of the corner of my eye. He was tall, almost reaching the ceiling. He had a top hat on his head and wore black pants, a white button-down shirt, and what looked like a black vest. And then, in an instant, he was gone. I adjusted the TV, and the rest of the night was normal. From then on, everything kind of just went on, the footsteps, the door opening and closing, the lights flickering, and every now and then a stray handkerchief of his was found. But mostly, any time we brought in any new electronics or strange items, he'd feel the need to mess with them, test them out, and see how they ran until he could understand them. Usually, it only took him a few weeks, and he never touched them again. This is the story of how I came to know Mac. The tall, broken man. I grew up in a small mining town in West Virginia. Me and my family have always been fans of the paranormal and have been to multiple locations in the state and out for our own paranormal investigations. Some locations included the Trans-Allegheny Asylum, Moundsville Penitentiary, Belair House in Ohio, etc. Every location is typically the same: pictures of orbs, small, slight sounds, quick imp spikes, just your typical ghost hunt. However, out of all the locations we've been to, one place is the only one that has really struck fear in me, and it was only approximately 10 miles from home. This place was a graveyard where a couple of very old family members were buried. It was on top of a mountain about 5 to 7 miles away from civilization, cell service, or paved roads. To get here, you would need a SXS or a four-wheeler, as the road turns into dirt after the last house on this hollow road. The trail leading up the mountain is very rugged, with massive rocks and ruts, and is about a 60 degrees incline, roughly. The graveyard used to overlook an old mining town about 100 years ago, which has all been destroyed or removed since then, and nothing is there but dense forest. The only structure that stands for miles around that area is a memorial sign for the miners that have died there, around 80 people. Growing up, my family would get together and go there to investigate overnight, before I was even old enough to go. Once I was in high school, I went with my family on these investigations to that graveyard on top of a mountain, as I had already been going to all these different locations that I had previously mentioned. From the first time I went, I discovered why my family was interested in this place. Out of the 4 to 5 times I've been there to investigate with my family, I heard blood-curdling screams, running through brush, train car collisions, voices with full sentences, touched, grabbed, pushed, pictures of full-body apparitions, seen streaks of bright, colorful light, growls, multiple shadow figures, constant temperature fluctuations, just absolute insanity. I've probably left out a few, but you get the picture. We would get very intelligent responses using the IMF meter by asking yes or no questions, light it up for yes, don't for no. When we weren't asking questions, the meter stayed pegged on the highest level. It can go for 30-minute intervals sometimes. Keep in mind there are no overhanging transmission power lines or service of any sort. It was a paranormal investigator's dream location. But there was one spot in the graveyard that was just different. The graveyard is divided into plots all the way across the top of this mountain. Some graves were on a plot in the middle of thick brush. Some were sunken in about 2 to 3 feet. Some were just rocks without any writing. But most were dated from the 1800s to the early to mid-1900s. The third plot over from our family spot was always where we got the most activity, but it was different. Being over there, I would feel sick, some of us would be burned or scratched, the questions we would ask would get a response that we should be scared or to run, the spirits there would respond like they are afraid, we would ask if something evil is over here or demonic and would immediately get a maxed out IMF response of yes, etc. Even on one occasion, we carry firearms because it is in the middle of the woods. My brother had his in a holster on his hip, and something tried to unholster his gun 3 different times, one of the times so violently that he almost fell down. When things got violent or we all got a weird feeling like something else, demonic, became present, we would leave. But overall, there was never an occasion where we were disappointed to go home. Fast forward to the present day, and we haven't been back there for several years to investigate. However, during that period, I was still fascinated by that third plot. I was an avid four-wheeler rider and would ride by myself sometimes, and I would often go there during the day alone. At that plot and around it, I would notice that there were no bugs, no animals, no light, just wind through the trees. I would go there alone a few times a year and just sit or walk around because the place just fascinated me. It got to the point where I would get exceedingly angry if someone in my family mentioned investigating there, and we ended up not going. Little did I know what I was inviting. Fast forward to recently last year, when activity began in my house. Doors opened, strange dreams, footsteps, heavy, banging, sounded almost like deep heavy bass, touching or grabbing while sleeping, even during the day, knocks, would come in fours for some reason, my room constantly hot like a sauna, curtains moving, lights flashing, etc. Once we all noticed this happening, we would sage the house weekly, salt the windows and door frames, and hang blessed crosses above the doors. Since then, there has been no recent activity, a couple odd days where something small would happen, but nothing in comparison. I have not been back there, nor do I plan to. What do you think? I have one sibling, a sister who is 19 years older than me. I was clearly an accident, but that's neither here nor there. One night, when I was about 3 or 4 years old, she went out on a date with this guy named Jeff. I was playing with Tonka trucks in our kitchen. In our kitchen, there was a door that exited out into our garage. We never kept cars in the garage but always just used it for storage, so the garage door was never open. I clearly remember seeing an owl staring at me through one of the 3 vertically stacked, roughly 1-foot square windows in our kitchen door to the garage. From my recollection, it seems as though the head of the owl completely filled the 1-foot square window. I was terrified and ran into the living room to tell my dad. I told him an owl was looking at me and asked him if he would go get my trucks. He obliged and then searched the garage. He didn't find an owl or any openings that would allow an owl to enter or exit the garage. He chalked it up to a toddler's overactive imagination and went back to doing what he was doing. About 30 minutes after that happened, my sister and her date returned home visibly shaken. When my parents asked them what was wrong, they told us that they had been out driving in Spooky Hollow, an area out in the country near where I live in central Indiana that is supposedly haunted and is a regular haunt, pun intended, of teenagers looking to fool around and or get high, when a large owl swooped down at the truck they were in, nearly crashing into the windshield and causing them to careen off of the dirt road into a ditch. After they shared their experience, my folks asked them what time this incident occurred, and they said about a half an hour ago. My parents told them about me seeing the owl, and they were stunned by the coincidence. According to my parents, my sister asked me how I knew about the owl, and I replied, rather strangely, because I am a knower, sis. I am 29 years old now and remember this event as well as one from my childhood. What portion is an actual memory and what has been pieced together from hearing the story from my family over and over is hard to say. For as long as I can remember, I have been fascinated by the mysteries of the world, UFOs, cryptozoology, ghosts, hallucinogens, ancient civilizations, etc. Despite my fascination with all things strange, I have never been one to give in to belief without adequate evidence. I am not religious or spiritual, nor do I believe in UFOs, aliens, Bigfoot, ghosts, or the paranormal. I am open to the possibility of all of those things existing, but in my opinion, there has never been scientifically validated evidence for any of those phenomena that is compelling enough to sway my skepticism into the realm of belief. That being said, ever since then, I have had a weird connection with owls. When I was in my teens, some friends and I were out driving in the same area where my sister and her friend had hit the owl, and we had a large, white owl fly directly into the windshield of the vehicle that we were in and bounce off. Strange coincidence, to say the least. Eventually, my owl connection comes up with friends when talking about strange events in our lives. This has led to me hearing some really strange owl stories from friends and acquaintances. My first manager at my previous job. She is a very buttoned down, devout Catholic, converted late in life, woman in her early 60s who, despite being very religious, is quite logical and skeptical in general. She grew up in a fairly loveless home with what she describes as militant atheist/beatnik parents. She remembers being woken up by an owl looking through her bedroom window as a child many times. Her sisters had the same experience. She also said one time her mother walked by her room as a child, and when she looked in, her eyes were glowing red. Neither she nor her mother ever mentioned the incident to their family after it happened. She cried when she told me this, and typing it gives me chills for some reason. The last manager at my previous job before I became manager told me a story about her son. He is in his mid to late 30s now and still swears that this happened exactly as described. He was supposed to be home at midnight when he was 16 or 17. He was on his way home on a dirt road in our county when he came across a large owl in the middle of the road. It wouldn't get out of the way. The last thing he remembers is stopping the car. The next thing he knows, he is driving again, and it's 2:30 a.m. He got home much later than expected, and his parents read him the riot act. He still swears by this story 20 years later. A friend of mine, upon finding out about my owl story, told me this. In his late teens or early 20s, he was a heavy partier. He is now in his late 40s and a respectable guy. He was on his way to a party and was supposed to be there by 9 p.m. on a dirt road in our county. He came across a 2-foot-tall owl in the middle of the road that wouldn't move. He stopped and got out of the car, and the next thing he remembers is showing up to the party only to find his friends all asleep. He woke them up, and they were pissed that he didn't show up to the party with the alcohol he was supposed to bring.